Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Brett. Brett is an individual that reached out with some information through the comments over on the YouTube channel, which I do get a lot of my interviews from those YouTube comments. A lot of people ask me if I read all of them. I do read all of them as of right now. But Brett is an individual, and Brett is an individual that'll be sharing something that happened in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So Brett, it's a privilege to have you on the show today. Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Jeremiah.
Awesome. And before we get started with you sharing what happened, is there anything else that the listeners would need to know about yourself for context before we have you start in on what happened that day?
Sure. I was born and raised in Marquette County, Michigan, and I am a professional environmental scientist, and I have been for 34 years.
Fantastic. Well, Brett, what I'm going to have you do is, if you wouldn't mind taking us back to as far back as we need to go, you can kind of lay out what happened that day that you had that interaction with Bigfoot up there.
Okay. And so this was back in the fall, October of about 1976 or 1977. I was a high school kid at the time, and that weekend we were at my dad's hunting camp, myself, my grandfather, and my dad and his brother, and a couple guys that we hunt with. It was a beautiful Sunday morning when I got up. All the leaves were in color, and we were there to cut wood for the upcoming firearm deer season. So I'd asked my dad when I got up if I could go for a walk or go grouse hunting for a couple hours before we started wood. Dad said, yes, you can, but I want you back here in 2 hours. I said, okay. So I grabbed my hat and I grabbed my pump shotgun, and off down the road I went. And I walked. We had a lot of property, and I walked up this ravine and sat in a seat that was my Uncle Charlie's. And I sat down in the seat for a while to rest because I walked a fair distance, and I could hear something coming behind me running very quickly. So I turned around and watched, and here comes a red fox running right at me. I had no intention of harming the fox at all. I was marveling how fast he could run, and also wonder what stirred him up, because I was the only guy around. And back then, there were very few people in that part of the county, within about a mile of Lake Superior. So he disappeared from my sight. I sat a little bit more, and I decided I was going to walk back out of the ravine out to the road and check a bear bait station that I had set up for hunting. I had a bear permit. So it was a bit of a walk to get there, probably a good mile, to go down these logging roads that Dad had to get to the seat. And my bait was on a small knoll, but I was walking through an area of sugar maple stand, and it had been damp that morning. We'd had a frost, and the leaves were thawing, so it was very quiet walking. And I was walking up towards the knoll, and I could see where I had tied the pail of just fish bait I had out there for the bears, and they had been coming for a couple of weeks. And I saw that the pail was pulled down, which is something I had done by design, because I knew a bear was up there and it was strong enough to snap the rope to get the pail down. So I walked up onto the knoll, and in front of me was this very large, hairy creature, which I thought at that time was a bear. I didn't really know anything else. I didn't know about Bigfoot. I knew nothing of that at my age at that time. And I stood there looking at this thing thinking, that is a really big bear. He was facing away from me, so his butt was facing me, and that's all I could see was his backside. And I was about 50 feet away. I was standing kind of askew to him. I had my pump shotgun. I wasn't afraid at all because I just thought it was a bear. So I knew I wasn't going to shoot that bear with a shotgun. I got myself in trouble with that. My grandfather would have been very unhappy with me. I had no intention of doing it anyway. I was just in there watching, looking at this very large, what I thought was a bear. It picked his head up a couple times and looking around. I had the wind in my face. I could smell him. He smelled bad, like a wet dog, as I recall. And I could see the back of his head a couple times. It's kind of a funny shape, not round like I've seen bears. I've seen a lot of bears in the woods at that time when I was out in the woods with my dad and my grandpa. And all of a sudden he picked his head up and he's looking around. Again, I couldn't see his front. I could only see the back of his head and his behind. He put his head down one more time. And then he picked his head back up and it took off running straight away from me. And it had a very funny gait. It didn't run like a bear. It had a funny gait. And the best way I could describe it was it ran like a chimpanzee. When I was a kid, we used to watch this TV show called Doc Tari. And Doc Tari had a chimpanzee and cheetah. And we watched it as kids and we became familiar with that. And that's the best way I can describe it would run. Again, it ran straight away from me down Little Knoll and then on into the timber. And I stood there thinking, is that thing injured? What is that? Was that an injured bear? And again, I was just a kid. I didn't know. So it disappeared. I shrugged it off and said, I better get back to camp now. Dad's going to be waiting for me. And if I'm late, I'll be in trouble. So I turned and walked back through the stand of timber that I'd gone through before. And I was just about out to the old logging road and I could hear something to my left. It would walk when I would walk. It would stop when I would stop. And I would look and look and look like, what is that? And I walked out to the road. I looked down the road both ways, didn't see anything. And then I turned and walked south, like we're heading back to the hunting camp. And it happened again. It would walk when I would walk. It would stop when I would stop. So a couple of times I stopped really abruptly to fool it, and it would take a couple steps to stop. And again, I was looking, I couldn't see what it was. And it did this and followed me, if you will, off to my left for probably a couple hundred yards. Again, I wasn't scared. I thought, oh, the bear must be following me. And I wasn't worried at all. I didn't have a care. I wasn't afraid of anything at that age. And as I got near to the hunting camp, I could hear a chainsaw start up. And that was my dad calling me, get back here. Well, once the chainsaw started up, I couldn't hear it anymore. I got back to camp and I told my dad and my grandpa and uncle and the guys what I had seen about the fox. And then this, what I thought was a bear. And then it was following me like that. And they all listened to me very intently, but they really didn't say anything. But I could see in their face like, yeah, here's a teenage boy with a wild imagination. But I said, I know what I saw and I know what happened. And all these guys were World War II, Korean War, Vietnam vets, all big, tall guys, had fear of nothing, which always was comforting to me when I was growing up. To have these guys are all really big guys around me. And that was the end of my experience. But for years, I hadn't put it in the back of my mind. I hadn't thought about it at all till probably 20 years ago or so. My dad was telling me a story where he had walked down one of the ridges at our camp. He's very elderly now, but when he was younger, he walked a lot. And Dad was talking about him walking down one of the ridges, and he heard a bear bellow. Well, bears don't bellow. Bears don't make any noise. But that was his explanation. And I didn't really quiz on him very much. I didn't say, Dad, what did it sound like? Well, it was the bear bellowing. Well, bears don't do that. I didn't say anything to him out of respect. But when he said that, it reminded me of that day that I saw this, what I thought was a bear or a creature in the woods. And I began wondering, what did I see? By then, Bigfoot was a thing. This would have probably been 2008 when he told me that story. And so Bigfoot was a thing. We were watching stories about it, the Patterson-Gimlin film, other films. And so I started thinking about my experience, and then I started thinking about what Dad heard. So from there, I again put it out of my head. I didn't think much about it. Life went on. I had gotten married. I had kids. I'd been active duty for 7 years. One day I was spending some time with my daughter and my grandchildren, and my grandchildren love to hear her stories. And so I told them my story, and I had never told anybody that until probably within the last 4 years. I subsequently shared that story a couple other times, but I never really told anybody. And Rachel said, my daughter said, Dad, you never told us about that when we were little. I said, well, Rachel, I kind of forgot about it up until Grandpa was mentioning his experience, and all of it came flooding back to me. And it wasn't like I was afraid of ridicule or anything. Life had gone on for me. I hadn't thought about it until that time. Well, once I did, I decided I wasn't going to talk much about it because people are going to look at me funny and they're going to maybe ridicule. I just decided to keep it to myself. So I told my other daughter what had happened to me and Grandpa's experience. And they both kind of looked at me kind of funny. But I said, girls, I know what I saw. I know what I smelled. I know what I heard. I know what I experienced. I said, I don't think that was a bear. I'm not sure because I couldn't see the front. But everything about that animal and how it ran and be following, all these years later, I'm starting to put two and two together. Subsequent, I watched a number of YouTube channels, listen to people share, give their testimony. And I wonder what it was I saw that day back about 1976 or 77. I'd have been 15 at the time, and we knew nothing about the Gimlin film, Patty, or these other experiences that people have, even in the Midwest, that I do now. And I'm glad to share it. It's not like me getting it off my chest. I haven't hit it. And just in the last few years, I thought, I got to share this. I got to talk about this because something happened to me.
Brett, thank you for sharing that. That is a pretty rare encounter for this podcast because we don't get to hear a lot about the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We hear a lot about the Pacific Northwest, other kind of popular states with Bigfoot, but it is pretty special to hear something about this particular state, especially up in the Upper Peninsula. Do you mind if I ask you some questions about what you experienced that day?
Sure. Go ahead.
Awesome. The first thing would be more about the area, and I'm just looking at the map of Marquette County, and I know things that on the map might not have been specifically there back then. I'm not really up with the history about Michigan and the Upper Peninsula, but I do notice that there's a state forest area in South Marquette County. Was it around that area at all, or?
No, northern Marquette County.
Okay.
Within a mile of Lake Superior, and that area that we were in is largely private land. To this day, it is very heavily wooded. It is remote. And like my dad used to laugh, we could walk so far back in the woods, there aren't even any deer. It's not quite like that anymore, but it was then.
Interesting. Do you think there could be, to this day, Bigfoot activity up in that area?
In our area where our hunting camp is, I don't know, Jeremiah, anymore because there's more people around. But as you get up towards the more northern tip of Marquette County, it's in the Huron Mountains. That's very possible. It's very remote, large tracts of private land that people don't get around in much because it's private. And it would not surprise me. And there's lakes and game and fish and heavily wooded. It would not surprise me. We have timber wolves. My brother got a photo of a mountain lion in west of there in Ontonagon County this year. It moves. You never know what you're going to run to because once you get further away from the cities like Marquette or Nagano-Ishuing, it's still to this day very remote.
Interesting. Now, your sighting is also unique because it sounds like for most of the sighting, really you just saw a back view of the creature, correct?
Yeah, I was about 50 feet away. I mean, I was fairly close, but all I could see was him or her down on the ground, cleaning up the fish parts that I had in the pail. It was eating those. I really couldn't hear it per se, but I could smell them. Oh, yeah.
So it was eating the fish parts. Now, was it using its hands to eat the fish, or just like, putting its head down there and chowing down on them?
So there's a lot of ferns,
Okay.
bracken fern. And so I couldn't really tell if it was using its hands or just eating with its mouth. That's a very good question. I couldn't see. I couldn't tell.
Mm. You also mentioned that you had called out specifically its backside, which is very interesting. Was there any detail about the backside that really jumped out to you in your memory, or was just like, man, that's just really weird?
My first thought at that age was, this is a really big bear. I mean, it's furry or hairy, dark, not black. And black bears aren't necessarily black either. There's always a little tinge of cinnamon or brown. And this animal had the same thing. I would say that the fur was probably around 4 inches long. It was pretty thick. No tail. There was no tail. I could see the muscles in its hindquarters and on its flanks, but there was some ferns, so I couldn't see his feet. And if I'd have been able to see his feet, then I would have said, "Oh, wow." But I could not see his feet. But I could clearly see this animal. It was big. And I was not afraid. I was not anything. I was marveling at what I thought was a very big bear.
Interesting. At that time, then, whatever you saw was standing up on two legs?
4. It was on 4.
It was on 4,
and
okay.
It ran on 4. It ran on 4, and its gait, how it ran on all 4, was not like a bear I had seen. And I spent all my life, at that time I was only 15 or 16, in the woods with my dad and my grandpa. And we spent a lot of time and seen bears and other animals. And we just spent a lot of our lives looking for them, looking at them. But that thing ran like something I hadn't seen before. That was remarkable.
Now, you already called out that it was very chimpanzee-like. For those who may have not seen that before, are you able to describe what it's like when a chimpanzee runs?
Its front legs are like reaching out to grab something. Its back legs, it's kind of a hop, like a chimpanzee would hop. They tend to run a little sideways. I've watched some videos since then, and when I saw like cheetah on Daktari run, I watched a YouTube here. I looked and I said, there it is. That's how it ran. I couldn't see the front though. I could only see the great big butt and watch it run through the brush and ran very quickly. But I could see his front legs like it was grabbing something. And I thought, well, that's an odd gait. And I thought, what if that thing is injured? It's got a hurt back, or its flanks are hurt or something, because it's not running like any bear I'd ever seen.
Was there any tail to what you saw?
No.
Okay.
No, I couldn't see a tail. And you really couldn't see a tail on a black bear either, but no. And there's nothing stuck out to me as remarkable about that, just a very big backside.
So when you look at, some frames of the Patterson-Gimlin film, or even if you watch it, you can really see the muscles, especially in the legs. And I'm going to shout out my buddy Jonathan Easley for pointing this out to me. You can really see those muscles ripple. Was that anything where you could see the muscles at all when this thing moved away from you?
Yeah, I could see his glutes, but you could see that on a bear sometimes too. I could see his glutes when it ran. I could see that, and what was tissue under the fur on its flank. I really got my best look at it was from the back and a little bit to the left, but it just ran straight away from me. But yeah, I was close enough. I could see his glutes, his butt muscles and his legs. And again, at that age, Jeremiah, I thought nothing of it. I just thought that was another bear, and it had a very weird gait.
Absolutely. Was the whole thing covered with hair?
Yeah.
Okay. What color?
Brown and dark, I would say black with some brown to it. No, I never saw its belly or its chest or neck or face because it was away from me. But what I saw was the fur was about 4 inches long, I would say, thick and black, nearly black to brown, very dark, very, very dark. I would say, if you asked me back in that day, I'd have said that was black.
Were there parts that you could see that had either worn down hair, or was the hair pretty much the same all the way around?
On his backside, it looked all the same to me.
Okay. Interesting.
He had a funny head. He had a funny head, though. He picked the head up a couple times. That did not have the shape of a normal bear. It was, I'm not going to say it's pointy. People say conical. I say, yeah, kind of conical. But I've seen a lot of bear in my life at that point. And that was the other thing. I thought, well, that's kind of a funny shaped head. And then when the way it ran were two things that stick out in my mind.
Did it seem to have a neck at all that you could see?
Yeah, a little bit. When it ran, when it ran on all four, you can see the head sticking out from the shoulders a little bit, which were big, but the whole animal was big. But that head and that gait were not normal.
So having that viewpoint, were you able to see any ears on the head at all?
No. No, nothing sticking up like a bear. Nope.
And I think that would be, well, I'm going to ask you, what, if you, thinking of everything that you remember that day, what would you say was the number one detail that made you be like, oh yeah, that was not a bear?
The gait, how it ran. The gait set me off, Jeremiah. And then the other little parts I thought about over years coming together. But it was the gait. I've seen lots of bear. I've hunted bear. This thing, this creature did not run like a Michigan black bear. Nope.
How does a Michigan black bear how would they usually move in that type of situation?
Run like a dog.
Okay.
Yep, run like a dog. A big dog.
Also, I would think the other big thing for me would be that no visible ears. That's a huge deal. Looking at pictures of bear, so I'll ask you, I mean, you usually would be seeing visible ears if you were dealing with an actual bear, correct?
You would see them. The bigger the head, the smaller the ears look. But you always see that ears sticking up, no matter what. You'll see the ears. And only a couple of people, and my girls too, said, "Daddy, could you see any ears in that thing?" And I had to think back and be objective about it. I mean, I'm an environmental scientist, so I'm also the world's biggest skeptic walking around. You got to prove things to me.
Right.
And so being objective about it, running it through my mind, said, you know what? I did not see ears. I did not see a tail. And I just saw a really big butt.
When it was running away from you, were you at any time able to see the bottom of the feet at all?
Yeah. Yep. No hair.
Okay.
No hair. Black bears don't have hair in the bottom of their feet either.
Right. Do you remember any color of what the skin looked like?
Gray.
Okay.
Yep, because it would flash. I could see him running until he got about 60 yards out. Then all I could see was this big black thing running through the woods really fast. But yeah, when he took off, yeah, I could see the bottom of him. But I've seen that before. And again, at that age I was at, Jeremiah, at the point was thinking it was just another bear. But they're gray. Black bear feet gray. Depends who. Being walking through clay, his feet are going to be the color of the soils he's in. But right. I was in a stand of sugar maple and hemlock. So there's nothing like that around. It's just all leaves. So those fields would be fairly clean, one would think. But that's a good question, and that's what I saw. Yeah, I could see a street.
When it was running, do you think it was able to run at the same amount of speed that a bear would, or what did it seem to be faster?
Yeah. Black bear, even a big black bear, can run really fast.
Okay.
And this thing moved really fast. Would I say it's faster than a bear? Because the gait was so different than a bear's, I can't judge that. But I can tell you that when it took off running, it disappeared very quickly.
Did you see anything that made you think that the arms and the legs were the same length, or maybe they were different lengths?
Well, I got to think about this a second. Because it ran with a different gait and like a chimp, I looked at that thing too. Is there, the front legs look longer than the back, but then the bears can look like that. But its gait is what threw me. The front legs were definitely longer, and I couldn't, make out the paws. But you can see when it runs, it's like it's reaching for something, like it's trying to grab a hold of the earth and pull itself forward. That's what it looked like. That's not what he was doing, or she, but that's what it looked like to me, like it was reaching out to grab. Bear doesn't run like that. Bear not run like that. I've seen them run lots of times. Not like that.
It's extremely interesting. It'd be interesting to see if people reach out from that same area, since you were, pretty specific in explaining, the area where this happened. Thank you for doing that. Is a very, very interesting. Now, sometimes when individuals have a sighting like this, it will affect, or they'll start to notice other weird things in their life afterwards. Did you have anything else weird happen in your life as you grew up into adulthood?
Oh, I've had a couple weird things, but then I've had 7 years of active duty.
Sure.
Overseas, been deployed twice. So there's plenty of weird things happen. Oh yeah, I have weird things happen, but that's probably that is in the top five of weird things that happened to Brett in his life. And people have said to me, "Oh, you saw a bear." Well, you said that to me in 1976 or 77, and I said, "Yeah, that's what I saw." But I've learned a bit, and I've become quite a bit older, and I'm a professional environmental scientist. I am a skeptic. I scrutinize, I study, I sample. That's what I do, Jeremiah. That's what I've done all my working life outside of active duty. So I can sit back without using imagination and recall that day, what I saw, what I heard, and what I smelled. And somebody say that was a bear in me, I'd say, I don't think so. I lived long enough to say, nah, I'm not going to fool myself into thinking that. I've been back to that spot many times. I was grouse hunting with a close friend of mine. We walked up and over that knoll, and I can remember that day very distinctly. I'm not afraid. I never saw it again. I don't know anybody else did. I sure would like to have a discussion with my grandpa. He's long gone now. He was quite elderly then. And ask Grandpa if he'd ever had an experience like that. Maybe he'll say so, maybe what, but I'll never know. He's gone now.
Right.
But I would have loved to have that conversation with Grandpa. You remember that day? And did it ever happen to you? Because when he was in Michigan, it was right around the turn of the century. He grew really old, and he had some great stories, but I never heard him tell them like that.
Being an individual that has to really notice details because of the different things you've done over the years, from what you were looking at that day and what you remember, did what you saw seem more ape-like or more human, or maybe something completely different?
I would say the gait is what I focused on in these recent years, Jeremiah. Ran like I said, like cheetah on Daktari. And I say it that way because anybody that grew up when I did, in the 70s. That's what you watched on TV, and it was a cool show. You can still find it on YouTube, and I've refreshed my memory by looking for Doc Torrey on YouTube. Sure enough, I find one, and they'll have a clip of cheetah running across a yard. And I point at it, I said, there it is. That's it right there. That's what I saw. Only really big, on all fours.
When you were walking back to the others, and I know you heard that, you heard the creature move through the woods. What other sounds were you hearing that day in the woods?
Really nothing else. The wind was calm. It had been very frosty, so it has to be a very still night to be frosty. I couldn't hear anything. And the nearest county road from where I was walking was a solid mile through UP Woods. And anybody that grew up there knows UP Woods is some thick woods. It blocks a lot of sound. And I could walk down the road. The leaves in the road were damp. But walking in the woods, you snap a branch, crunchy crunch. That's what I could hear off on my left. And again, it would walk when I would walk. It would stop when I stopped. And this, like I said, it went on for probably 200 yards as I was walking down this old logging road, which was dirt with leaves on it. And when Dad started the chainsaw up, I don't know if it scared it away or what, or I just couldn't hear it, but it was no longer following me. It probably knew there were some guys at camp. And again, these are all really big guys, not afraid of anything. So, and I wasn't afraid. I thought I was a bear, Jeremiah. I figured this doggone thing is following me back to camp. See how close he gets. Right. I'll tell my grandpa, we'll see something happen. But it didn't. It quit.
Was your dad starting up the chainsaw to get you to come back? Was that a normal thing he would do? Okay.
Oh, yeah, because he was growing patient.
Yeah.
And he started up, the old hold my chainsaw, which was, get your butt back here or there's going to be trouble. And I was already on my way. So, yeah, that was him calling the kid back because we had work to do.
That's funny. I mean, yeah, it makes sense. Like back then, you wouldn't have a way of, there's no electronics really out there. Nope. You didn't have a cell phone or walkie-talkies or anything. So that works, definitely.
Nope. Yeah, you had a watch, you had a compass, and if you're late, you better have a good excuse. Well, I had a watch and a compass, but I had no excuse. But I got back when he fired that chainsaw. And I listened to stories. All four or five of those guys are all standing there listening to me tell me the story. A 15-year-old skinny kid. My dad, 6'2", way over 200 pounds. His brother, my grandpa, the other guys with all World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam vets, afraid of nothing. They listened to me, but you could see the look of skepticism on their face, like,
sure.
Yeah. I said, I know what I saw, I know what I smelled, and I know what I heard. No one's ever going to change that. And to this day, it has not. I'm 62 now.
So it sounded like you spent a lot of time out there in those woods over the years. Did you ever hear any sounds that just did not really belong or that were, a little weird or anything like that?
The only other weird thing I heard was I was hunting bear at that same spot. Might have been a year later. But back then, you could get a bear permit over the counter in Michigan.
Oh, wow.
I heard a bobcat screech. That was the weirdest thing for me. Other than that, no tree knocks, no nothing like that. I've never heard that in my life. And at that time, I wouldn't have known it anyway. But nothing out of place. Just that day. And I've been back there before. I've hunted deer around there, and the guys in our camp. Gosh, this is 50 years later. Almost. No. And I always wonder when I go out there, I would love to see that again. I'm not afraid of it. I would love to experience that again, see that again. So I don't have to ask St. Peter at the pearly gates, hey, dude, what did I see?
Right. Show me again, St. Peter. Definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, man, that's wild. You are currently an environmental scientist as of today?
Yeah. Yep, for 34 years.
Wow. So I'm just going to ask, you can decline, because of your current Do you have any thoughts regarding? I'm sure you have some really interesting thoughts. Being an environmental scientist about possible conservation. Does conservation need to be a thing if these are actually discovered, or what the implications are if Sasquatch is discovered in an area someday? Is that anything you might have any thoughts about? Or
Thanks for asking that, Jeremiah. I have thought about that a lot. I'm not sure how much effect that would have in Michigan, but I'm in the Pacific Northwest, in the Southeast, where timber products are the backbone of livelihoods and industry. It could have a significant impact negatively on the economy. I think that if we discover they are there, and I'm not far from making up my mind that they are after my experience. We have to think about that, and there are steps of preservation that don't have to be so impactful to industry and to livelihoods. But we're not talking about a spotted owl, or we're not talking about small mammals and birds that we take conservation measure for. I mean, this is a big animal. This thing is big and needs area and needs range to eat. So when scientists and industry and legislature come together on deciding what are we going to do about this now, it'll be interesting to see what they come up with. Because industry is going to have a lot to say about it. There are very strong political action committees, lobbyists that are going to want to lessen the blow to industry once we find these things are exactly what we think they are. I don't know what will happen.
It'll be.
Do I think that they need to be protected? Just like any other of God's creatures, we need to protect that. If someone needs to defend themselves, like I would, I'm not going down. No, I'm not going down, and nor would anyone else for that matter. But that is a really interesting question, how industry and the legislature would come together to come up with a preservation plan, protection plan, or something for Bigfoot.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing, because if you look at the big picture over the years, every now and then another county will pop up with, hey, if you see a Bigfoot, don't shoot it, or you'll get a fine, or there'll be these different there'll be these things that won't be a fun time if you do take action against it. And it's interesting how maybe it's more of a kind of a slow burn. I mean, this is just me talking, but maybe slow burn preparing for something that might be coming out in the future. Who knows? There's people that reach out to me, like, park rangers and forestry workers do reach out to me. They don't really come on the show, but if those individuals did start to come on the show, there could be some real solid information that starts to get put out there.
So I'm a good friend of mine that frequents Kentucky, has friends there. He lives in Michigan. He grew up a mile from me and has been in those same woods with me. And he was a lifer. His whole career was active duty in the Army. He has friends in Kentucky near Fort Knox. He travels down there to see them, to get away from winter, and they like to go cave exploring or spelunking, whatever you call it. And he came back one year, and I said, "Hey, how was your trip down?" "I was great." He said, "But we got to a campground in one of the caves, and a park ranger there was telling us about Bigfoot." I said, "What? What are you talking about?"
Wow.
He said, "Yeah, you guys might not want to park here. Somebody saw one, and the ranger was telling about things." And Tom said he looked that ranger square in the eye, and he said, "Sir, I am a combat vet. I am former Army, and you've got me worried." Now, for him to say that, there's something to be worried about. And the ranger said, "I'm just telling you what we were told." And they did not camp there. His decision, and their decision was, and their crew, their jeepers, was, maybe we'll go to town. So
wow. And that was Kentucky.
That says a lot. Yeah, and he's a combat vet, 16 years active duty, National Guard, deployed all around the world. He's got two other buddies with the same thing, and they're all looking at each other with giving this guy kind of the hairy eyeball, but it's coming from a ranger. So that means something. And they shook his head. He said, Brett, I said, well, what did you do? We got in the car and we left. Yeah. I said, well, I'm sure that ranger understands the economic impact telling people those kind of things because you left, but the word gets around. I mean, we're all connected now on the internet, email.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not the only guy he told that story to, but he just looking at me, shaking his head. I've never told him my story. Tom has never heard me tell my story, ever. Never, ever. But yet, he had one of his own. Now, he didn't get to see it. It was secondhand from a park ranger. But it was enough for him and his buddies and their families to go someplace else.
That's wild. I wonder if that was around the Mammoth Cave area.
Yep.
Was it really?
That is exactly where it was. That is exactly where it was.
Man, you do this for 5 years and you start to get really good at guessing. Yeah, that's wild. Yeah.
That was what Tom said. And I don't talk to Tom much anymore. He lives far away. But yeah, it was Mammoth Caves. And that was one of their favorite things to do all year long, was to jeep over there and hike and spelunk and do what you're allowed to do. But after that occasion, I don't think he's ever been back. That sucks for that Park Service. But
yeah. Did you say that was just a few years ago, you said, or?
Within the last 4 years.
Oh, man.
Yep.
Okay.
Within the last 4 or 5 years,
yep.
That was his experience. And I said, and he's a very curious fellow and afraid of zero. And I said, you didn't want to stay and find it yourself? Nope. And when the park ranger told us that, we said, thank you. And we went home, back to whatever town that they were in. You got to understand guys like that. They're not afraid of anything. Desert Storm, right. Afghanistan, they've been through a lot of stuff. But he went home.
Extremely interesting, man. Yeah. Brett, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight and for sharing a really interesting. There's not many accounts where it's just this viewpoint of the creature that I've taken. So this is a very, very interesting one. I'm glad you came on the show tonight to share what you experienced that day.
I appreciate the opportunity. I've told this story a couple other times, and every time I tell it, I start to remember a couple things. The question you had about the ears, I hadn't thought about that much, but I have a vivid memory in my mind what I saw and the feet. And so you joggle a couple things in my mind, Jeremiah, that were details I hadn't thought of in a long time. Not that I glossed over, just no one ever asked me, and I didn't have to think about it.
Right.
But I am now.
There you go. Well, if anything else, if you ever come across anything else out there, feel free to reach out, Brett. But I appreciate you coming on, and thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list. Number 1, encounters from Franklin County, Texas. Number 2, encounters from the entire state of Iowa. Number 3, encounters from Oak Ridge, Oregon, or the surrounding area. Number 4, any individuals that know about Bigfoot being flown off after the Mount St. Helens eruption. Number 5, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter while in the military. Number 6, those that have had a Bigfoot encounter in the southern New Hampshire or north central Massachusetts area, including Franklin County, Massachusetts. Number 7, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter in a Bible camp or Boy Scout camp setting. Number 8, individuals that have had Bigfoot try to enter their house forcibly while they were living inside. Number 9, individuals that have actively have a Bigfoot living on their property. And lastly, any sightings that are in the Ouachita National Forest area of Oklahoma or Arkansas. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one. If you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.